Hey guys, tired metalhead weatherman here. It's been a while. It feels like it's been an eternity, really. 3 days seems like an eternity compared to what we were dealing with earlier this year, where I was uploading pretty much every day, sometimes even twice a day. So, Stark slowdown, apologize for it, I guess, in a way, even though it's kind of out of my control in a sense. But good to be back. Um, like I said, with the weather pattern being the way it was going to be kind of hard to post. So thanks to everyone who was kind of stuck around through it all. But things are starting to change here, hence why we're here now. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Make sure you're smashing that like button, hitting that subscribe button as well, and obliterating that share button. Here we go, though. So if we actually go ahead and take a look at our upper level trough here, we can see that for the most part, we're still kind of on the tail end of that zonal, of that little bit of a zonal setup here, but there is inclinations of things starting to pick up here, especially towards this little flank here. We're kind of getting to more of what this is starting to do here, but we're starting to see a little bit more in the way of troughing beginning to take shape here. Nothing super robust in the short term here. We're looking at the short range euro right now, but I want you to take a look at this right here. Well, I don't necessarily think anything is going to come of this. Seeing this little inkling right here maybe would allot some, including myself, to think that down the line, this subtropical jet's going to start to ramp up here. And once it does, we could be looking at the potential for some more active weather, maybe even severe weather coming into play here. There are two seasons of severe weather typically. There is one in the fall, along with the one in the spring, and also early summer. But the thing with these second season setups, they're very unusual. They end up often having high shear, low cape events. So we'll have to see how this ends up panning out. There's a lot of factors that are going to go into this, but right now I'm kind of leaning towards it not doing anything. But this is really just the beginning of what could be to come here. Of course, I showed you the 18Z name on purpose because if we go ahead and look at the GFS, we can get a much further look out. GFS always will go to 16 days out, or 384 hours, and you can see inclination of that exact same little trough beginning to develop here. Still looks about the same at this point, but watch what happens as time goes on. That little trough begins to develop, and then watch this slew of action begin to come into play here. Much more troughing, much more activity, much more amplitude within the subtropical jet, and even starting to get into the polar jet here. So I do think as we get towards the latter half of the month, we could be looking at the potential and extra emphasis on the word potential for maybe some stronger storm systems, maybe severe weather, maybe winter weather. We're with as far as we're looking, there's a lot of unknowns, but nonetheless here it does look like the weather is going to start to pick up shortly. And of course, along with that, we will probably continue to see some persistence with the flip-flop wind pattern, flip-flop temperature pattern that we've been seeing. It's pretty much been the story of the month, and it looks like that will continue. If we look towards the mid levels of the atmosphere, mid levels here, we kind of see a good inclination of that as well, especially as we go out to the start of the week. At the mid levels, that trough isn't quite as pronounced as it is towards the upper levels, and that's really a big reason why we've kind of got a question mark with this. And well, I'm kind of leaning more so towards it not being that active, but like I said, we're really just looking at trends here more so than anything else still. Right now, heading into the weekend, I expect it to still be relatively quiet. So there's plenty of weather still for you guys to enjoy. I'm not painting a gloom and doom scenario for sure. We're definitely not trying to, but it does look like things do start to ramp up just a bit here. Because here we are looking at 123 hours out. Here's that same trough that we were looking at on the Euro earlier from College DuPage. And then, like I said, watch what happens. And like I said, when we're looking for trends on here, we're looking for transition at different levels of the atmosphere. If we can see a similar look from 250 millibars up to 500, that's a good start. And right now, from what I can see here, Looking at the pressure map as well. So far, it looks like we're still going to be in a relatively warm dominant pattern. Towards the end of the month, though, if this holds out, that could be some almost, those are likely to be record warm temperatures once more. And this looks like this is towards the 24th into the 25th. If this ends up being the case, that's wild. And then also, I do think that there could be chance maybe for some severe storms. Like I said, looking 378 hours out, not much to really have confidence in. Only 1 to 2 models really goes out that far. And me, I kind of like to compare the models. So with that, I'm not gonna really put a lot of merit into that, but it is something that I am watching and something that maybe you should be watching too down the line. So here's a look at our air masses right now and what we could expect over the course of the weekend into the start of next week. For the most part, we're kind of like I said before, in more of a flip-flop phase. We start to see that warmer air mass start to build in more to the north here. Towards the south, we're kind of a little bit cooler, but not by that much. It's not going to be a huge temperature departure here. I think that for the most part, we may see some 60s and 70s across the southeast, but I do think eventually, especially once we look towards the GFS, we'll get a better look. We'll see that for a period, we'll start to see that cold air begin to come back in, especially towards middle of next week in particular. We start to see that cold air mass really start to develop here as we get towards Tuesday, heading into Wednesday. And this is mainly going to be prevalent for the south. Then here's another cold air mass, and this is one I'm watching a little bit closer. Maybe thinking along the lines, maybe some winter weather right now with this one. Not as much in the way of severe right now, but at the same time, you always have to watch this little clearing between these two air masses as well. That usually will often end up being a flashpoint, but I think cold air is going to dominate for the most part on that one. As we go from the 19th and the 20th, there's the flip-flop pattern doing what it does best. But once we get towards the end of the run here, we start to really shift into more of a negative PNA dominant pattern where we see a lot more cool air off to the west and warm air off to the east here. But I'm interested to see what happens beyond this point, especially once we get towards next week when we get to the maximum range, because we could be seeing a very cold dominant pattern across the entire country possibly. This would be typical of the El Nino type setup that we talked about in a previous video. Link to that will be in the top right corner, by the way. But as a whole here's what all of that's going to correlate into the temperatures here. So not much to really see here. We know that we're going to be cooling down this weekend across a large part of the southeast and into the, well, pretty much the entire eastern US here. Towards the west, we still got a decent bit of cold air coming in, but that warm air is going to start to uptrend and start to take over a bit more as we head towards the latter half of the weekend, especially to start out the week. If we were to go on the GFS, make our comparison, it kind of goes a little bit further than that. We start to see that cold air begin to march back into play as we get towards the end of this run here. But towards the middle, you can see that warm air building here. And then it looks like a couple of fronts could be possible here just from looking at the temperature map alone. So like I said, always something to keep an eye on here. Another key factor when it comes to weather systems, especially severe weather, is that moisture return. That moisture return is a key factor to everything. So if we're looking around right now, don't really see anything prevalent for the weekend, which is no surprise there. But I do want to make note that if there were any areas that I would watch, it would be more so towards the Gulf Coast states. I would expect maybe marginal risk at best, nothing more than that though. So if we were to go to GFS, and this is where things get more interesting, I'm going to kind of go back and forth manually this time instead of just putting it into a loop here. If we're starting out, of course, we go into the weekend. Mainly, like I said, more so towards the Gulf Coast states, mainly Louisiana. We start to see some richer dew points. But what ends up happening as time goes on is those fronts come through. Usually they'll end up keeping the lion's share of the Gulf of Mexico moisture kind of cut off here. But as we continue to go forward here, once we get towards about 348 hours out, like I said, it's pretty far. Look at how that moisture is starting to come into play again. And this is what kind of has my attention a little bit right now. Like I said, really not a lot of merit that I can put into this, but if we get a moisture return like this, if this trend holds, that gets interesting. We have a pretty strong little moisture nose, as it's called here, and it's these that you always have to be on the lookout for, especially if it's on the boundary like what we're seeing here. We have the contrast. You see these 60s right here, and right behind you have the 30s and 40s and the dew points. That's always something to keep an eye on, because that's usually a dry boundary or dry line, if you will, possibly beginning to try and develop some frontal boundary of some sort. So it's these things that I often will look out for. So like I said, 384 hours out, not a lot of merit to put into that, but definitely something to keep in mind here, especially on my end. Oop. I have two screens here, so I'm getting used to that still. But if we were to look at precipitation, here's the picture across the board right now and what we can look like into the weekend. We definitely see a fair amount of moisture beginning to come into play here, showers and storms, possibly even across the deep south here. We'll see that continue to come into play throughout the day, especially early tomorrow. Then after that, we mainly are looking at most of the activity towards the Gulf Coast states. New wintry system comes into play, but most of the action is going to mainly be far to the north. The cold air just hasn't really made that advanced to some of these lower elevations and really even past the U.S. Canadian border here. And that's really what we're looking like as we get into the weekend and beyond here. Then as we look at the Gulf Coast here, a lot more activity in play, especially as that trough really starts to get going here and that low pressure area starts to really organize. If we look at it from the GFS perspective, it only gets more active from this point, really. If we were to start out, it looks virtually identical for the first 90 hours. No real surprises there. But it's then when we go beyond that point that looks really interesting. Here's that first wintry system I'm kind of a little bit leery of, right around that time frame that we were talking about between the 16th and the 17th. Gets a little bit more mature, but ends up sliding north of the border there. If this system right here could get some moisture around it, that could be interesting as far as maybe severe weather potential, but just doesn't really seem like anything can manifest with that frontal boundary out ahead of it. Maybe we see a pretty strong looking line of storms here as we head towards the 17th here. So like I said, a lot to keep an eye on here. Slight little bit of even a negative tilt orientation with this if this holds up. But like I said, still looking pretty far out. Not a lot of confidence I can put in just yet. But as we continue to go forward here, sorry if I'm clearing my throat, by the way. I got a little bit of gunk going on right now. We see multiple low pressures here across the south and the new wintry system coming into play here around the west, and this one looks pretty stout. Of course, time frame always is a factor here, so chances are this is going to look completely different once we actually get within a realistic range for this. But like I said, if these come into play here, this could get interesting towards the end of the month here, especially for Thanksgiving. I know a lot of you are probably planning to travel, so just make sure that you're keeping an eye on the weather. Definitely keep an eye on this channel. But that being said, good to touch base with you guys again. If you want me to do a little bit further of a revisement of the weekend forecast tomorrow, definitely hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and obliterate that share button as well. That's all I got for you guys tonight. Hope to see you soon. It's been Ty Metalhead Weatherman. Till then, take care, stay metal, and see you next time.